Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp, born on March 19, 1848, and passing away on January 13, 1929, was a prominent figure in the American Old West. He served as a deputy sheriff in Pima County and held the position of deputy town marshal in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. One of his notable engagements was the gunfight at the OK Corral, where lawmen confronted and ultimately killed 3 outlaw cowboys. Here is an interview that Wyatt Earp shares on gunfighting. This was dated back in the 1910. He offered to give an interview about his thoughts on using a gun. In his own words, Wyatt is going to explain how he became one of the most feared and accurate gunslingers, even if he was about the slowest. The most important lesson I learned from those proficient gunfighters was the winner of a gunplay usually was the man who took his time. The second was that if I hoped to live long on the frontier, I should avoid flashy and showy trick shooting, treating it as if it were a lethal poison. I was a fair hand with pistol, rifle, or shotgun, but I learned more about gunfighting from Tom Spear's cronies during the summer of '71 than I had dreamed was in the book. These seasoned pioneers held a deep reverence for their craft, a necessity in the perilous conditions of their time. To them, shooting extended beyond mere marksmanship. It encompassed the selection of firearms, methods of carrying them, techniques for swiftly drawing and employing them, all converging toward achieving the perfect blend of swiftness and precision. Their ultimate goal was to master that critical split second between life and death. They invested countless hours practicing and gathered extensive experience in real-life scenarios to fortify their arguments regarding shooting style. When I say that I learned to take my time in a gunfight, I do not wish to be misunderstood, for the time to be taken was only that split fraction of a second, the pivotal moment that determined the distinction between deadly accuracy with a six-shooter and a costly miss. It is hard to make this clear to a man who has never been in a gunfight. Perhaps I can best describe such time-taking as going into action with the greatest speed of which a man's muscles are capable, but mentally unflustered by an urge to hurry or the need for complicated nervous and muscular actions which trick shooting involves. Mentally deliberate, but muscularly faster than thought is what I mean. What Wyatt meant is that he made the decision to shoot a long time before the trigger was pulled. In my extensive experience as a lawman in the frontier, I did not know a really proficient gunfighter who had anything but contempt for the gunfanner, or the man who literally shot from the hip. Subsequently, I came across accounts of such gunplay in later years, allegedly practiced by men renowned for their expertise with the Colt 45. From personal experience and numerous six-gun battles which I witnessed, I can only support the opinion advanced by the men who gave me my most valuable instruction in fast and accurate shooting, which was that the gunfanner and hip shooter stood small chance to live against a man who, as old Jack Gallagher always put it, took his time and pulled the trigger once. Cocking and firing mechanisms on new revolvers were almost invariably altered by their purchasers in the interests of smoother, effortless handling, usually by filing the dog which controlled the hammer, some going so far as to remove triggers entirely or lash them against the guard, in which cases the guns were fired by thumbing the hammer. It is important to distinguish this practice from gun fanning, in which the triggerless gun is held in one hand while the other was brushed rapidly across the hammer to cock the gun, and firing it by the weight of the hammer itself. A skillful gun fanner could fire 5 shots from a 45 so rapidly that the individual reports were indistinguishable, but what could happen to him in a gunfight was pretty close to murder. I witnessed Jack Gallagher's theory validated in numerous life and death scenarios, which steadfastly reinforced my commitment to the principles of gunfighting that I had gleaned from him and his associates. There was no man in the Kansas City group who was Wild Bill's equal with a 6-gun. It's worth noting that Wild Bill's true name was James B. Hickok. Legend and the imaginations of certain people have exaggerated the number of men he killed in gunfights and have misrepresented the manner in which he did his killing. At that, they could not very well overdo his skill with pistols. Hickok knew all the fancy tricks and was as good as the best at that sort of gunplay, but when he had serious business at hand, a man to get, the acid test of marksmanship, I doubt if he employed them. At least, he told me that he did not. I have seen him in action, and I never saw him fan a gun, shoot from the hip, or try to fire two pistols simultaneously. Neither have I ever heard a reliable old-timer tell of any trick shooting employed by Hickok when fast straight shooting meant life or death. That two-gun business is another matter that can stand some truth before the last of the old-time gunfighters has gone on. Most of them indeed sported a pair of revolvers, and when the time for action arrived, they drew both guns with both hands. However, their shooting methods diverged significantly from the popular portrayal. Primarily, two guns made the threat of something in reserve. They were useful as a display of force when a lone man stacked up against a crowd. Some men could shoot equally well with either hand, and in a gunplay might alternate their fire. Others exhausted the loads from the gun on the right or the left, as the case might be, then shifted the reserve weapon to the natural shooting hand if that was necessary and possible. Such a move, the border shift, could be made faster than the eye could follow a top-notch gun thrower. But if the man was as good as that, the shift would seldom be required. Whenever you see a picture of some two-gun man in action with both weapons held closely against his hips and both spitting smoke together, you can put it down that you are looking at the picture of a fool or a fake. I remember quite a few of these so-called two-gun men who tried to operate everything at once, but like the fanners, they didn't last long in proficient company. During the era I refer to, within the circles I have in mind, when a person reached for their firearms, they did so with a singular, earnest purpose. Bluffing held no place in their repertoire. When a gunfighter reached for their trusty .45, their entire focus was on achieving the swiftest and most accurate shot possible, aiming to make that initial round the decisive one. Their thoughts revolved solely around the firearm as a means to eliminate their adversary before they themselves met a grim fate. The possibility of intimidating an antagonist was remote, although the drop was thoroughly respected, and few men in the West would draw against it. I have witnessed a rare breed of men who possessed such astounding speed and self-assuredness that they would reach for their weapons even when a determined adversary had them squarely in their sights. And yet, they managed to emerge victorious. However, such individuals were the exception. In the realm of gunfighting, ostentatious displays or bluffs were typically reserved for the braggarts who either lacked knowledge or had a reckless disregard for their own lives. It's important to note that none of the accomplished individuals I've known, who left their mark in the annals of frontier law enforcement, such as Hickok, Billy Tillman, Pat Sugre, Bat Masterson, Charlie Bassett, and others of their caliber, ever engaged in the practice of notching their guns to tally their kills. Such a custom was more commonly found among outlaws and members of the lawless ilk who killed for the sole purpose of boasting about their deeds. There are two other points about the old-time method of using six guns most effectively that do not seem to be generally known. One is that the gun was not cocked with the ball of the thumb. As his gun was jerked into action, the old-timer closed the whole joint of his thumb over the hammer, and the gun was cocked in that fashion. The soft flesh of the thumb ball might slip if a man's hands were moist, and a slip was not to be chanced if humanly avoidable. This thumb joint method was employed whether or not a man used the trigger for firing. On the second point, I have often been asked why 5 shots without reloading were all a top-notch gunfighter fired when his guns were chambered for 6 cartridges. Buy bulk ammo at Lucky Gunner. The answer is merely safety, to ensure against accidental discharge of the gun while in the holster due to hair trigger adjustment. The hammer rested upon an empty chamber. As widely as this was known and practiced, the number of cartridges a man carried in his 6-gun may be taken as an indication of a man's rank with the gunfighters of the old school. Practiced gun wielders had too much respect for their weapons to take unnecessary chances with them. It was only with tyros and would-bes that you heard of accidental discharges or didn't know it was loaded injuries in the country where carrying a Colt was a man's prerogative. Sources: David Burnell, Ops Gear, Abe's Guns, Wikipedia, Stuart N. Lake. Compiled and edited by Old West Legends, updated November 2023. So what do you think about Wyatt Earp's historic interview? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Old West Legends. Thanks a lot.